In today's video, we're going to go over a treatment routine for someone with a spastic hand. If you're new to this channel, I'm Tara. I'm a neurologic physical therapist, and one of the missions of this channel is to empower you with as many tools as possible to take ownership of your rehab and your overall health, to maximize your recovery potential after a neurologic injury. And due to popular demand, today we're going to talk about the wrist and the hand. In this routine, we're going to follow a similar format that I follow with my patients that I see in person, which is mobilize first. In other words, make sure you have the range of motion that the soft tissue structures will allow your hand to open up. Then activate wrist extension, finger extension, and finally add a functional activity. It is a similar format that I follow regardless of the body part, and I think it is a critical component of setting you up for success when you do get to those functional activities. So now let's just focus on that first part, that mobilized part, getting the soft tissue structures loosened up so that you have as little resistance as possible getting into that position. And most importantly, not just with the mobilized part, but in all of the steps that we're going to go through today, the shoulder and the elbow position is really important, and that's why we're going to start with understanding all the structures in the arm that play a role in hand and wrist function, and how having the arm in a certain position is either going to set you up for success or it's going to make whatever you're trying to do extremely challenging. So why does all this matter? Well, we have muscles on the front of the shoulder that bring this arm bone forward. But some of those muscles don't just bring this arm bone forward, they're what we call a two-joint muscle. So they cross the front of the shoulder and the front of the elbow. So what does that mean? Muscles that bring that shoulder forward or the arm bone forward also bend the elbow. Now, why is that important and how does that impact the wrist? Well, muscles that flex the wrist also cross the elbow joint. So why does all of that matter? Because you will need to decide what is the best position for you given the flexibility in all the soft tissue structures in your arm to set yourself up for success. So if the shoulder is forward and the elbow is bent, there's going to be a little bit more slack on the wrist flexors, meaning it's going to be easier to extend your wrist. Why does that matter? If you're in the very early stages or you have a lot of tightness in your arm, you would want to start with the mobilization with your arm forward and your elbow bent, because that's going to put a little bit more slack in those wrist flexors, meaning that you're going to be able to extend that wrist, right? So if you have more slack in those muscles, it's going to be easier to extend that wrist and extend those fingers. However, there is a point where you are going to want to start working your arm back towards extension and elbow extension and working on that wrist extension for either whether that's stretching, mobilizing, or activating. Why is that important? If you want full function of your arm, you will need to be able to extend your wrist when all of the slack is taken out of those shoulder muscles on the front of the shoulder and the elbow muscles that flex the wrist. So there is an argument to be made that in the later stages, you will eventually want to get to a point where you can reach your arm back or have your arm positioned further back and your elbow extended and working your wrist extension and finger extension. Now, one other component of the wrist and the hand muscles and how they're set up that's important to understand. And again, there's no right or wrong to setting up the positioning in your arm. I'm just kind of bringing these out so that you can set yourself up for success. If you're not getting a movement or you can't activate a movement, putting a little bit more slack in some of these muscle groups might be beneficial. The other one is when your wrist is what we call pronated, there is also more slack in those wrist flexors. So the wrist flexors also pronate, meaning the palm faces down. Pronate that wrist. So If your hand is supinated, you're going to be putting a little bit more tension on those wrist flexors, meaning it's going to be a little bit harder to open the fingers and open the hand. For some of you, you're at that point where you need to start working on opening your hand with your hand supinated. But the other end of the spectrum is also true, that if you're in the stage where your hand is super tight and you cannot get it out of that clenched position, having your hand pronated or palm facing down will make it easier to open those fingers. Now, one other thing that's important that I talk about in almost every video when I talk about activating or relearning a new movement is the different levels of difficulty that you can achieve by just positioning. So we have gravity assisted, which would be fingers moving down towards the floor, or if you're working wrist extension, wrist moving down towards the floor. That's kind of gravity assisted. Gravity eliminated is movement parallel to the floor. And against gravity means there's additional force on the wrist and the hand pulling it down. Against gravity is moving away from the floor. That's also going to be very important for a lot of you, given where you're at in the recovery stages, choosing the best position for you. Again, easiest is always going to be movement towards the floor. Next hardest would be movement parallel to the floor. Harder than that would be movement away from the floor, and then harder than that would be to start adding some kind of a resistance or some kind of a load or adding a weight to your hand. So that's very important. And then the other thing with all the exercises, whether that be mobilizing, activating, or doing a functional activity, would be having the arms supported. Especially if you have spasticity, you want that arm as relaxed as possible. I see this quite frequently, people trying to do exercises with their arm just floating in space. Yes, there is a stage where that is beneficial, but in the early stages, just know that if you have your elbows supported and you have a lot of spasticity, it might make the spasticity less of a barrier to whatever movement you're trying to achieve. So I know I spent a long time on that, but positioning is by far the most important component to restoring hand and wrist movement. Long story short, most of you are going to want to start with your shoulders slightly flexed and your elbows slightly flexed to set yourself up for success as far as getting that hand open. All right, and then from there, now let's just go into some of the stretches. I am going to have the arms supported and I am going to have it slightly forward, again, to give a little bit more slack on those muscles. And then you're just going to clasp your hands together. All right, some of you might need to, if this is your stronger hand, really kind of work this hand in there to kind of get those fingers pried open and to get your fingers in between. What I like to do is to take your thumb and wedge it in there and kind of pull that thumb out to the side. So you're going to take this thumb, get it underneath that other thumb, and kind of pull that thumb out to the side. Talked about this in other videos, but having this thumb slightly abducted or slightly out to the side can sometimes relax some of those intrinsic muscles in the hand that are pulling that hand into that fist. So if your hand's like this, to start, you just want to kind of pry your fingers open, get that thumb underneath, get that finger in there, and then from there, again, elbow supported, slightly flexed, you're going to work on bringing that wrist back. We're not going to worry about the fingers yet, one joint at a time. Again, we're just mobilizing. You just want to make sure you have the range of motion. And then we're going to work on flipping that hand over. Supinating. This is the hand that we're stretching. You're working towards supination. Remember what I said? The wrist flexors pronate and flex the wrist down. You're trying to go opposite of that. So you're going to extend and try and supinate. Extend and try and supinate. Okay? Then if you wanted to add a little bit of more of a stretch, now you can work on starting to extend that elbow, right? Because remember, it goes all three joints connected, right? So you can start here. Now you can start working on also extending that elbow. That right there, without even worrying about the fingers yet, is going to be a good stretch for a lot of you. So starting here, over, down, and just work on bringing it down this way. Okay? Wrist extension. All right, and now we're still working in the early stages. Let's say you have a lot of tightness. We're not going to combine the wrists and the fingers yet as far as stretching. Now let's just focus on the fingers. So best way to kind of get those fingers open is to kind of use a table, pull that hand back, right? Fingers might be clenched up. Try and pry those fingers open. All right, so you're just going to do your best to kind of pry the fingers open, pry them open, and then press down. Okay, let me show that to you again. Wrist down, kind of pry those fingers open, best that you can. And then get that thumb out, best that you can, and just kind of press down. All right, don't worry about the wrist yet. Again, clenched up fist, get it down, get those fingers open, press down, and then if you can, stick that finger under and try and get that thumb out to the side. Now, I know many of you have already seen this, but this is a brace, a splint that I do have made locally. I think splints are so valuable when it comes to the wrist and the hand. This one kind of keeps the wrist in extension and the fingers open. I know this is a wrist and the hand video, but sometimes the first step in getting the hand to work is to relearn supination. That's an extremely important part. Once you can get that, you're working the same muscle group that extends the wrist. That's why just working on supination is such a valuable exercise. In that case, the best way to do it is to have something that keeps the wrist and the hand open, just like we do with the shoulder and many other joints of the body when we do movement retraining, as we try and block as many joints, or you've seen me do this with other joints on the body. We try and block as many joints as possible so that you don't have so many joints you have to focus on. This splint will block the wrist. So I'm holding it up. If you put it on the table, it is easier to get on, but I just want you to see. So hand goes down, thumb goes in. I have plenty of people that can put this on their own. So although it may look complicated, it does take a little bit of time. But once you do it a couple of times, you'll figure it out, or most people figure it out. You get these straps down like so. And again, you just rest your hand on the table to do this. Okay. And then you've got these straps which pull this wrist into extension. All right. If you want to learn more about this or you want to purchase one, there is a Google Doc in the description. Fill that Google Doc out and we will respond to you to let you know if we think this is something that might be suitable for you based on your answers in that Google Doc. But again, once it's on, starting point is always to work on that supination, having that wrist and that hand blocked in extension, supination. Always a good starting point prior to working on the hand member. Wrist extension and supination, it's the same muscle group. So if you're working that supination, you're kind of sort of also working or starting to activate those wrist extensors. Okay? But from there, then you would want to work wrist extension. Gravity eliminated. Gravity eliminated. Elbow supported, elbow flexed, shoulder slightly forward. setting yourself up for success. The more you're back here, the more tension there's going to be in those wrist flexors, creating some resistance, slightly forward, elbow flexed, the easier it's going to be to start activating those wrist extensors. When it comes to the finger extensors, I like to start with gravity assisted. So same thing, shoulder, arm slightly forward, elbow flexed, hand hanging off, letting it drop, letting it drop. If you attempt that and you're just not getting any finger, your fingers are just staying clenched, you can try and do a little bit of like stroking down your hand. Sometimes that works to get those fingers open. Pull on those fingers a little bit. Remember, and I've talked about this recently in a couple of the shorter videos, any movement is good movement. I think people get frustrated because they try and open their hand, and that's not necessarily going to be what you want to be thinking about to set yourself up for success. You have to be okay with just seeing any movement in the correct direction. That is kind of telling your brain, it's feedback to your brain. Oh yeah, when I think about opening my hand, that's what that feels like. Okay, you're just getting the brain to reconnect with that hand, letting it drop, pulling on those fingers a little bit, maybe even pulling them, you passively extending them, and then letting them go and not having them curl back up. Okay, that would be the other thing that I'd recommend in this like activation stage. Pull them down and then not let them curl back up. Or try and keep them relaxed so that they don't curl back up. All right, and then just like I show several times on with other joints in the body of just blocking as many joints as possible, I also love these little like Velcro finger splints. They just Velcro onto your fingers. I'll put a link for these in the description below. But the other option is just to start by just blocking your fingers in extension. Again, I have a lot of people that can get these on themselves, so it just takes a little bit of finagling, but it is possible. To get these on after a little bit of practice, but you're just going to block your fingers, block one joint so you don't have to really think about that joint. These keep those joints straight, and then you could try this way, just working on this motion here with those fingers slightly blocked, keeping that wrist even flexed, and just working. Remember, any movement is good movement, right? Any movement at all in this direction. That's what most of you are trying to work on. Most of you, your hand is clenched up. You're trying to work on getting those fingers open. Now, the thumb is a little bit different. There's a little bit of a different technique that works pretty well if you're in the right stage to activating getting that thumb out, and it's what we call a quick stretch. Something we do in the early stages of muscle recovery, and what it does is it almost kind of like creates like a recoil contraction in the muscle. So you're basically pulling it down very quickly, and then what you're trying to do is activate some of the mechanisms in the muscle that cause it to kind of recoil up. So we call that like a quick stretch technique. If there's any part of the wrist, hand, fingers that works on, it probably works the best on the thumb. So you're actually just going to kind of pull the thumb down a little bit quick, and then as you let it go, you're going to try and think about thumbs up. So quick stretch, down, thumbs up. Quick stretch, down, thumbs up. Okay, so we call that a quick stretch. Quick stretch down, thumb up. Quick stretch down, thumb up. So love, love, love these finger splints. Link for these will be in the description below. And then there's one other tool that I've been a fan of lately. It's gonna work for some of you. It's not gonna work for everyone, but it's just this cheap thing I found on Amazon that is meant to exercise your fingers, but I've used it recently as kind of like an active assist. So I'm pretty sure that these little things here are meant to go on the other side of the hand, if I can remember correctly. But what I'm using it is like active assist to open the hand. So you just kind of hook these on the fingers. Again, it takes some finagling to get them on. And it's not going to work for everyone. Some people, there's just too much tightness or the way that their fingers are pulling into, it's not going to work. But it wasn't that expensive. That's why I kind of like it. And then what you're trying to do is allow it to assist, okay? So down, and then you just allow it to assist. Again, it works somewhat. But for the cost, I personally think it's way better than the money you guys are spending on that like pneumatic glove personally, because I think that pneumatic glove is really hard to get on. But again, just something very simple, probably best for just kind of working this joint right here. But for certain people, I've used it and it seems to work pretty well in just assisting that hand opening. And then as far as function, a great thing to do to start working on attaching the movement to a functional activity is just to try and work on putting something in your hand and letting it go. So I always like to start like with it hanging off the table so that your wrist can be a little bit flexed. And then for a lot of you, it's going to start by just not digging your fingers into it, just letting it go and letting it drop. Okay, so that would be like the starting point for wrist or finger extension. But then if you're beyond that, the next part would be to lift it up and be able to drop it into something. Okay, so now you're working a little bit against gravity, opening those fingers. Okay, so wrist extension. And for some people, it's not even letting it go. You can just work wrist extension by just lifting it up and setting it down in something, lifting it up and setting it down in something, right? The other thing that you can do with it is just have targets. Set a target over here that you're just going to, without moving your arm out to the side, that you're just going to get that ball towards that target. Okay, that's gravity eliminated. But balls like this, these Nerf balls, work really, really well. They're lightweight. I also like wiffle balls if you're in the really early stages, because they won't squeeze. Downside of those is they are slippery, so they will work for some but not for everyone. But you just have to give it a try. You don't really need to buy anything for the functional thing. My suggestion is use things around your house, put a brush in your hand. Those things are also functional. Pick a cup up, preferably a plastic cup, move it across the table, let it go, anything like that. It's always good to follow up the movement retraining with some sort of a functional activity. But the main take-home message of this video was really about the positioning. It really is important where the rest of the arm is, and a lot of you don't give that a whole lot of thought. So make sure you set yourself up for success. Earlier stages, you want more slack in those muscles that need to lengthen to get your wrist towards extension. Have the arm forward. If you're in the later stages, start moving the arm back into this position. Hope you guys found this video helpful. Don't forget, if you're new to this channel, this video does have a PDF handout that goes along with it. In the PDF handout, you'll get pictures and descriptions of all the exercises that I showed in this video. To get access to that, you do need to be a bronze or a gold monthly member. To learn more about our membership programs and to sign up, you can visit rehab-hq.com. Also, if you're new to this channel and you haven't yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button and turn on that notification bell so that you get notified every time I upload new videos. I enjoyed spending time with y'all today, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good day.